Thank you all for joining us. I know this is the first thing in the morning. Our panel today is really about scaling from India for the world. I'm going to ask the panelists in a moment just to introduce themselves, and if you could just advance to the next page for a moment. Yeah, you can see some of the data behind me. This comes from a Bain report on SaaS we do annually. I'll just make a few comments about India SaaS, and I think India SaaS is a really fascinating space, but I'll start by saying it's a young space. I would sort of say at most it's a decade old in many ways. Two, it's in some ways built off the foundations of a 35-year-old industry of services in India, which is a $200 billion industry. But this India SaaS has developed incredibly fast over the last decade or so. There's something like 1,600 to 2,000 SaaS companies that are India heritage, meaning founded in India, founded by Indian founders. It is today, as you'll see some of the data behind me, the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. India SaaS generates about 12 to 13 billion of revenue. That's up like 3x in 3 years. In 2022, there's 5 billion of capital that came into India SaaS. Obviously, a lot of it came in the front end. There were 40 exits. There's DPI in India SaaS from an investor perspective. People are making money. There are 14, 15 companies that are over 100 million in ARR from India. So it's developing scale. I think there's a flywheel, and Vinod, I'm going to ask him to talk a little bit about this, of founders, investors, and customers, right? I said there's 1,600 to 2,000 companies. There are large companies. Those founders are inspiring, mentoring the next generation of founders. Their employees are spinning off companies. There's a whole set of investors, some of whom are in this room, that focus on India heritage SaaS at every stage. So now we have early stage companies, early stage investors. We have seed stage. We have mid stage. We have late stage. We'll talk about the characteristics, but I think there's one of the things we'd like to get across is why India? Why does India companies and India heritage have a right to win in SaaS? I think it's a combination of a number of things. There's product innovation. This is not the services story that many of you have heard and know about of kind of we do more for less. This is actually about product innovation combined with cost leadership. I think you'll find that just India SaaS companies generally are more cost efficient and more capital efficient than many of their peers on a global basis. They're also scaling at the same rate. I think the third is some of them have picked segments to focus on, whether it's sort of vertical focuses or horizontal segments, and we'll talk more about that. On the vertical horizontal, probably 80% of the capital invested in India has gone into horizontal SaaS or infrastructure SaaS. I think part of the reason why is there's such a large developer ecosystem in India. I think 10 to 15% of the global developers are in India. And so it just creates a really interesting story, and the DPI creates liquidity and creates sort of the grease for people to be even more interested. And I think this is just the beginning. Literally, it's the first inning, the first over. I think there's a long way to go. India SaaS probably represents 4 to 5% of global SaaS. I think this can get to 8 to 10% over the next 3 to 5 years. So the growth is tremendous in front of it. So with that, what I'd like to do is ask Chris, Rohit, and Vinod to introduce themselves, and not just introduce themselves. Their stories are kind of the stories of India SaaS, right? They've been here at the beginning. They built their businesses over the last 10 years, and some of them multiple businesses. I know at least Chris and Vinod are very involved with SAS Boomi, and Vinod, I'd love for you to talk about that. And so maybe what I can do is ask Vinod for you to start. Just talk about your story as the story of India SaaS, and also maybe a little about SAS Boomi as well.
Happy to do it. So I moved to the US in 2016, end of 2016, with my startup, CloudCherry. And the interesting thing I observed was, though the diaspora was huge, I didn't have any peers to look to for help and guidance around how to go about building my US business. And I'd never lived in the US before. Happy to say that today there's more than 50 founders in the Bay Area itself who've made the US-India move. So my startup, CloudCherry, got acquired by Cisco in 2019. Then I worked at Cisco for a while, and now I'm doing a few things. The most important, of course, is the marquee March portfolio company, Unifor. I'm on the leadership team there. But the POV I want to present here essentially is my work at SAS Boomi. I'm the chair for the SAS Boomi US program. And SAS Boomi essentially is the world's largest founder paid forward community. We've worked with close to 3,000 startups.
Fantastic.
And the thing I want to just amplify, which is very important, these aren't programs and events that we conduct. Krish pointed out, we have 23 simultaneous startup development programs running at any point in time. We are talking deep dives, roundtables, very, very, very tactical and deep workshops on how to build your business, 0 to 100K, 0 to 1 million, 1 to 10 million, 10 to 50 million. And it's uber tactical, goes very, very deep, completely volunteer run, which I think I'm very proud of. So hundreds of volunteers, 23 simultaneous programs, 1,500 startups in our programs today, but close to 3,000 startups that have gone through the program. And our goal is simple, and you like this headline. It's $1 trillion of market cap from India SaaS. So that's really the big goal we're gunning for.
That's amazing. Maybe if we just keep going. Right.
Yeah, I mean, Vinod made some really good points over there. So my story is sort of simple. For the last 15, 16 years, I've been in and out of startups. I was one of the earliest engineers at Montgomery. But before that, I'd spent some time at Electronic Arts over here. So, there's always been the backing of, products and trying to understand what we're doing. And, a lot of understanding that we developed over the last several years in terms of data is getting expressed in this company that I run right now, which is Excel Data, founded in 2018. I moved here towards the end of 2019. And it's been a very, very different journey once we pointed the entire GTM to the US. And I think, the one thing that a lot of Indian founders are now experiencing is that the market in the US is a lot easier to operate in if you have the right ingredients. So if you're bringing the iPhone to the US market, you'll actually win it big. And I think that's like the key ingredient for any B2B SaaS company coming out of India to succeed in the US market.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Hey, I'm Krish, co-founder and CEO of ChargeBee. ChargeBee is subscription management and billing, and building product in the advanced revenue management stack for subscription businesses. We serve over 5,000 customers globally, predominantly US, European markets, and started ChargeBee 11 years back. My background is in TCS, mostly implemented Ariba systems for large enterprises. That's my background. My co-founders come from Zoho, building products, and by virtue of actually having four co-founders, 3 of them having experience of building products, we are fortunate to actually build for global markets. And we built this initially from India, got to product market fit for the first. It took us 3 to 4 years to actually get there, focused on SMB markets, and built from India, but for global markets. And then subsequently, we started scaling this. And so initially bootstrapped, now venture funded, with now 1,100 employees, more than 175 people in US, 94 people in Europe, and the rest of the team in India and a little bit in Australia. I'm based in Amsterdam. And it has been an interesting journey of scaling and serving customers globally.
It's truly a global story. I'd like to just turn, you've heard a lot about India, I think, or potentially you've heard a lot about India over the last day and a half. I think there was a focus on India in your LP meeting for March. Some of you may have heard John Chambers yesterday in the panel from USISPF talk about the relationship between India. And we hear a lot about India, right? It's demographic dividend, it's a young country, GDP per capita is kind of 2,200 going to 3,000 over the next few years. There's a lot of interest in India's story, but why India for SaaS? Like what is it about India that's helped this ecosystem develop of 2,000 companies, whatever the number is, 13 billion of revenue. What is it about in India that if you're an investor in this room, if you're a founder, if you're just someone of interest, what gives India the ability to grow companies like yours? Vinod, you want to start, Vinod?
Yeah, I know Krish and Rohit will talk about the business and competitive advantages, so I will avoid that point.
Okay.
And I'll talk about the other softer elements of
That would be great.
why the country is growing so fast. Usually, you talk about the flywheel, and for me, really, it's how much time does each turn of the wheel take to crank. So I said when I came here in 2016, there was nobody to turn to for tactical advice, company building, referrals, from tactical to strategic advice. This past fall, we hosted 110 founders as part of the SAS Boomi caravan, wherein we got them here, took them through a roadshow in Silicon Valley, did deep dive sessions on sales, marketing, making your first hire, how to land your first customer in the United States. And that speaks to how fast the ecosystem is learning. In 5 years' time or 6 years' time, we now have an ecosystem and a support system for any founder thinking about the US-India cross-border move. And that's really what the community element is that I want to talk about. We had 100 people approximately when we sold. At least 4 of them have gone to start their own startups. And I know the others have similar stories from InMobi, Freshworks, ChargeBee, any company. And 6 years ago, I didn't know if we had great inside sales talent in India, or maybe 10 years ago when we started. Today, there's so much talent because they've worked at 3 or 4 startups. They've learned the tricks of the trade. So every turn of the wheel, what took 10 years became 5 and 3 and 2 and 1. So now you have this ecosystem where the flywheel has truly kicked in. The community is paying it forward. And the talent appreciation is at a scale that I think is unprecedented for any other startups ecosystem in the world. So my POV essentially is there's this hidden element to why India is what it is. And I know there's other very good points that they'll make. That's why I didn't want to jump in there.
I want to build on your point, if you may. Right? So when we think about a B2B SaaS company, whether it's B2B2B or B2B2C, we think about advantages and how we build an edge through various parameters, right? One is the technology arc of adoption, right, of the latest and greatest trends. But that at some point becomes a leveler and gets democratized, and that adoption is important to ride the wave, but it's not the thing that actually allows a company to thrive over decades. But one of the most, and then the GTM edge is also important, but again, it's more about the channels. But the most important one, which is the thing that sticks, is the pragmatism that is needed to think about building product and product innovation. And I think that's one of those key ingredients, right, of the 3. I would say there is a certain advantage. When you think about a 0 to 1 motion, right, you mentioned briefly about the cost leverage, but it's not cost arbitrage that we are talking about. It's actually about the gestation time needed to understand a customer problem with pragmatism, obsession, to build sticky advantages over time is more about, can I fund $500,000 to $1 million, put a team of 5 people and build a 0 to 1 more new product line that becomes my green shoot 2-3 years later? That becomes possible. So you can actually make your money last longer. We were able to fortunately bootstrap our company and subsequently raised like hardly $200,000 in the initial round, $350K. But we actually got through the initial 3.5 years in a very scrappy way till we got to that level of product market fit. But when I look back, we were very fortunate that we were building from a part of the world, but with access to customers as if we were sitting next to each other, like in London or San Francisco. And that's something beautiful that's actually happening in terms of like building on the shoulders of like every era in which these technology platforms and communities are possible. And then suddenly you have like all the ingredients coming together in a way that there is no difference between a customer that's a company that's actually sitting in Valley and doing this versus me sitting in Chennai and writing a Hacker News article, and we both are actually conversing on the same topic, and we have access to the same like understanding of the problem in a very similar context.
That's a profound point, right? Which is the sort of the equalization in ways. Rohit, I know you wanted to jump in on this.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the life cycle, right, what gets you off? And I think, there are 3 mega trends going on, right? And I mentioned this last year on the same panel: open source, cloud, and developers. And I think that's massive. That community has just taken off, in all ways. If you look at the number of lines of code committed on GitHub from an open source community standpoint, I think, it'll be the highest from India at this point in time. Cloud has made infrastructure accessible, so you can actually get started with a very, very low cost. The cost of failure overall, both in terms of your personal time and society's acceptance, that has increased. You can bunk with your parents. There's not a problem. You can fail and you can come back home. The final thing is, as you go through the life cycle, so that got you started. What's going to get you going? And I think that is where what Krish and Vinod were saying, that there is access to customers. I'll just layer in one more thing. If you have ever worked with Indian customers, what they drive you towards is, creating massive value. And when you've actually built that value in the product, it's easier to bring it to the US and sell it.
That's fantastic. I want to pick on this point because one thing both Chris and Rohit have spoken about, and I've seen this in other India heritage SaaS companies that either I work with or invested in, is this ability to first innovate, that first cycle with CIOs, with customers in India, particularly on the enterprise. But then I'd love to sort of understand, like, how did you make that move? Because one of the hallmarks of India SaaS, it's been very successful cross-border, right? There is a domestic India SaaS industry, but it pales in size, right, to the US. But each of you actually did very well in translating what you originally built in India, actually to the US, or in your case, to Europe. And so I'd love to, how does that work? How did you do that? How are others doing that?
Let me take that one first.
Okay.
I think we have tremendous ability to take homework. So I'll tell you what happens. You think that you've built the product, you bring the product, it actually never works.
Yeah.
It just never works. The customer will come and tell you, oh, you have these 5 features, but I needed the 17 others that you're missing. So what we do is actually write it down on Excel and say, okay, can we deliver this to you over a period of 3 quarters? And I think it comes to us naturally because we've been consultative in our approach for the longest time. I think that's a unique advantage.
Yeah. So a little bit of what Rohit's speaking about is our consultant. There's this services heritage, right? You came from TCS, for example, that most of you are familiar with, which basically provides this advantage. Chris, I'd love for you to talk because you've been very successful not only taking your business to the US, but you've been able to take it
I think,
globally.
so if you look at our founding group as well as the team, my 22 years of career, I've only served customers in US and Europe most of the time.
TCS.
Right? So that's my career. My first 10, 11 years of training on the job has been serving, mostly working with global customers. So I actually understand less about serving India B2B.
Yes. And just while you're answering this, one thing I think would be helpful for us, is this unique to Chris?
No, this is millions of people,
Yeah.
right? Which is people who straight away, after like doctor or an engineer,
Yes.
everybody becomes an engineer, right? Then you get into the IT services, which has been a trend over the last 30, 40 years. And a lot of us actually got trained on serving global customers, which has been very natural. I
Yes.
think. So very fortunate that, ultimately when we look back, we are able to see how fortunate that a lot of us actually have a deep domain expertise in various areas. Like for example, I got immersed in for 10 years into everything related to indirect purchasing
Yeah.
across various industries. And only when I connect the dots backwards, I'm able to understand that how important that has been in my understanding of enabling GTM motion within our organization when we do our upmarket motion, right? And these little things actually, and then there are so many industry verticals in which there are millions of people who are actually staying in that for like a prolonged period of time. While practicing as a software engineer, you're also developing deep industry expertise, whether it's healthcare, banking and financial services, and so on and so forth. And the best talent pool for us in terms of, so every time we think about the India, right, previously has been more about offshoring through developer access and all of that.
Yes.
But one thing that's phenomenally changing and actually is a huge advantage in our customer experience is the access to the engineer pool, which is when it comes to actually serving a customer, there is this whole pre-sale solutioning, engineering, right, customer success, and continuous advisory services and consulting services, especially for large customers. And there's access to a talent pool of people who know how to put systems together, and you bring them in, and we talk about enabling a salesperson within 3 to 6 months, right, getting them to sell their first deal. But you think about hiring a person from a TCS or a Infosys and then put them into serving like, they get a chance to touch 50 customers a month compared to working with one client. That's like brain candy.
Yes.
And they are up and running within a matter of 1 month to understand everything about your product, the whole problem, and just enjoy working with customers. That access to talent pool that you are able to embed complementing your sales team in solution engineering is a huge advantage. And the cost of the pod we are talking about is, the cost of a pod of a salesperson plus a solution engineer we're talking about is anywhere between 100 to 150K in OTE. And that is a massive advantage when we think about selling to customers anywhere between even 20K ACV to 100K ACV.
Yeah.
You can actually build a flywheel around it instead of actually thinking you need everything to be in market.
Yes, yes. Well, I actually would like to pick on that a little bit. Maybe I'll ask, because this is a really profound point. There are just, of the India SaaS we've spoken about, sometimes people think, geez, India, I can go get technical people, right? I can go get developers. But in fact, actually, you can build companies, as Chris is speaking about, where you have inside sales, customer success, solutioning in India. And I'd like, Vinod, for you to pick up on this, because the other thread I'd like you to sort of pull is, on this topic, is actually when you do that, it actually creates jobs here. And you have some really interesting data around this.
Absolutely. So we, at the US ISPF, we polled our founders who had moved to the US on a non-immigrant visa. So when I first came in, I had like 10 months left on my visa when I landed here. I had to secure, hire 10 people and get my renewal in the next 6 months. So that's how I came in, and wasn't so long ago. So a lot of founders made that move between 2016 and 2019. So we polled 16 of our founders who got non-immigrant visas. In the year 2021, and we are collating 22 data, each founder that moved on a non-immigrant visa created 40 local jobs here at 3-point-something X of the US median income. And for each job in the US, you created 8 jobs back in India. So 140, 320. That was the math. And the beauty here is, historically, immigration has been looked at with a negative lens.
Yeah.
But this is net positive immigration. You come in, you create 14 local jobs. Each of those startups were on course to double their headcount, the current climate notwithstanding, because businesses are growing. I know Krish, I know Unifor, all of these businesses are close to doubling year on year, even at scale. So hiring is kind of in sync with that. And most importantly, most of these companies are Delaware C Corps. So they're going public in these markets. They raise money from local investors. So the net impact on the economy is incredible. So that's how I look at the impact that India SaaS has in the US.
That's fantastic. Let's flip it just a little bit. We've talked a little bit about India forward. Tell me about your experiences and how you think CIOs and other buyers of SaaS viewed you as CEOs selling, whether it's infrastructure services or your subscription payment services. Like, is there acceptance? So as I think about it from a lens of an investor, or if I think about it from here, is this, and the paradigm in my mind a little bit is, if you think Israel, you think cybersecurity, you're always going to fund them, they're going to get premium values, you're always going to get CISOs opening the doors for them. How do you find acceptance of India SaaS?
Yeah.
Chris, yes.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
When I think about my interaction with a lot of customers, like Freshworks, right, is one of our customers. But at the same time, when we talk about customers like a Personio, when I talk to a Hanno, who's the founder and CEO of a Personio, right, we are actually in similar boat. He's building from Germany for the world.
Yeah.
When I talk to the founder of Sendinblue, and he's taking on SendGrid and others on a global stage, building from France, but building a company with a global identity. Actually, a lot of us are on very similar boat when it comes to actually how we are building these companies. Calendly is a customer, right? Global scale, very interesting, right? And there is only, in my mind, there are only 2 types of companies. One is the companies that are in the valley that actually find a lot of customers together in the valley.
In here,
and then the rest of the world is how the landscape looks for us in terms of interaction, shared problems, and a lot of shared context in terms of how we are building things.
That's fantastic. Rohit, maybe I can ask you to answer the same question, but I'm going to add a second part to it.
Sure.
We've alluded to the fact that India has done an amazing job of building horizontal and infrastructure SaaS companies. Yours, Lambda Test, Postman, Browser Stack, these have all grown and grown incredibly well. Maybe just talk about it in that context of why does that work so well?
So I think, so we were on a panel yesterday, and Matt Carroll from Immuta was making this point that, the age of platforms is back. So
The age of platforms is back.
Yeah, the age of platforms. And it's very simple. You have 52 weeks in a year, 12 weeks if you're a CIO. That goes in planning, appraisals, and managing people issues. So you net have 40 weeks, and 20 of those weeks will be dedicated to 3 of the largest vendors, CSPs from the cloud and ISVs.
Yeah.
So net you have 20 weeks left, and so therefore you have to be on the top 3 priority list to qualify. So to your earlier question that why would they buy from you? They'll buy only if you have value. They're not going to buy if you don't have value. And I think it's no longer a question of whether you're coming from India or you're not coming from India.
That's fair.
The question is that, you have the iPhone or you don't.
Yeah.
If you have the iPhone, I'm going to speak with you. If you don't, then, there's no point. But on the second part, I think the evolution of the platforms is because, like I said, we take so much homework. We actually figure out the adjacencies very quickly, and we understand the concerns of the person. Because at least in our case, and I can contextualize it for data, in the case of data, you're managing data teams, you're managing technology, and you're managing data delivery. And all of these 3, while they are adjacent, but they're very different concerns. But you're looking for one platform that can solve all of this. And I think that's causing the evolution of Excel data, but many other companies in the similar space.
Every time you mention homework, I always think like the grind that is needed in
Yeah, I
building
mean,
a
it's
B2B business,
it's
right?
basically
it never gets
finding-
easier,
Yeah.
right? It's like, yeah, every day you have to like go through the details on the grind, and that's
Yeah,
how
I mean, the
we do
product
it.
market fit is also an evolution, right? I mean, what will fit for $200 million is very different for what fit for $20 million.
Yeah.
The question is, how far do you want to go?
And do you enjoy that? Right, that grind.
Here's I've got so many questions in my head I'd love to share. One thing I'd like for you guys to talk about, there's two, I'll come back to, let me start with this one. This is a point that I think, Vinod, you made. I think part of the reason with this Valley's and the West Coast has been so successful is there's been a pay it forward sort of a phenomenon. The PayPal mafia, sort of funding companies, generating entrepreneurs, the Microsoft, the Cisco, the Google, et cetera, et cetera. That phenomenon, I think maybe it was you, Rohit, has started pretty earnest in India. Not just SAS Boomi, but I think somebody made the comment that if you go in Bangalore on the outer ring road to Sajapur, which is a portion of Bangalore, every tech company in the world has a business there. We have our scale in Mobi, your old company, Flipkart's, Intel, Cisco's. Can you just talk about that? Because I think that's important for you to understand that the ecosystem is paying it forward. People are leaving, 4 from your company. I think you said there were 3 or 4 already started from...
Out of ChargeBee, we have
at
45
ChargeBee.
ex-founders in ChargeBee through people who actually have sold companies joining us,
Yeah.
as well as acquired founders, now like 6 or 8 of them as well.
Yeah, so maybe you guys could talk about, there's
Yeah.
funds, right? There's a Together Fund, and
Yep.
there's just this, I think the ecosystem is accelerating.
So let me take a very tangible example and demonstrate this. So Freshworks obviously was probably the first marquee Indian SaaS startup to go public.
Yeah.
There's others who've done that. And if you look at the history of Freshworks, there were a lot of smaller tuck-in acquisitions, founders who started building their companies. Something around PMF didn't work, got acquired, came into Freshworks, saw how a very fast-growing go-to-market machine looks like. At least 5 or 6 of them, or maybe 10 of them, have come out since, raised capital, and are building very high-growth companies.
Yeah.
So they've learned the tricks of the trade, so to speak, there, much like folks learned at Zoho. And that is really what I think is very significant. But I want to make a larger point. This was just a simple example. Historically, India, 75 years as an independent nation, we originally exported intellect. The smartest people
Yeah.
just left. Simple. You're smart, you have opportunity, access, just leave. Then when the services wave happened, or rather the world is flat wave happened, is when the global services came here. Akamai set up in India, Cisco set up a center with 25,000 people. This big TCS, Infosys of the world came. Now the intellect was foreign, the ideas, so to speak, but the property production happened in India, which is now people like Krish learned what problem someone has with an Ariba implementation, with a core banking implementation. Every single nuance of that problem, tens of thousands of people learned at a level of detail you can't from the outside. So you have the intellect and the property creation ability coming together today, wherein you're building product companies. And the 2 other missing elements, that is access to capital, experience, resources, all of these have come together in the
Third one
perfect
is
storm.
ambition.
Uh,
The dreaming and
ambition.
installments
Ambition,
happening.
yeah.
Spot on, right? I mean, exactly. Instead of doing a services company and I know founders who built a services company because they didn't have capital. After 3 or 4 years, the moment they start generating a surplus, they say, I'm going to invest this surplus and productize the biggest problem I have seen in my services journey, and they want to build product companies. And that is what you're coming to see, coming to bear here, essentially.
On a net basis, the number of users that we have for all the products that were ever built in the US, whether it's, going back to Informatica or, SAS or SAS, no matter which way you look at it, right? I mean, I think we have developed an expertise, and it's not just services. When somebody buys, let's say, Salesforce, you need Salesforce consulting. I was actually flying last year with somebody 2 years back, and we missed flight. I asked him, that gentleman was working at Infosys. I said, how many people do you have? He says, I have 18,000 people running the Salesforce practice.
Wow.
So, and I was making this point again last year, that the next CRM is not going to come from anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's going to come from there. So I think on a net basis, if you start using these products, it's not just about, the 3 mega trends. You're also big users of these
Yes,
products.
absolutely, absolutely. So let me turn to the page just a little bit. I'm an investor, I'm a founder. I want to learn more about India SaaS. I want to get more involved. How do I learn about this? How do I get into the ecosystem? What practical advice would you have for folks in the audience?
Start with me? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll make a shameless plug for SAS Boomi, of course. As I said, it is the world's largest founder-paid forward collective, completely volunteer-driven. However, even volunteer things need money. So we are funded by 8 venture firms. March is a sponsor of the movement, and I think without that, it doesn't happen. But it's not about capital. I would just say lean in.
Yeah.
There are incredible resources. If you just go to sasboomi.com, you can see the literally added .com to that. You have access to every resource you need with regards to what's the India macro, what companies are being built, what programs are being done. Essentially lean in. And within the March portfolio, there's a few incredible companies starting from BillDesk. You've got ShipRocket, you've got Axel Data, you've got Unifo. There are some incredible companies. So whether you want a macro on India, please come to SAS Boomi, have a look. Or do you want to look at companies solving for any one of the problems, billing and payments, shipping, logistics, data observability, or customer experience? You have representative companies to look at. So please have a conversation. I'm definitely happy to talk about Unifo. But the macro plus tangible examples, when you put them together, all of you will see what's happening here is once in a generation. It's magical. And for those of you who were there when Mike Milken spoke and then John Chambers spoke yesterday, it was a very exciting time for me and for India SaaS. So just lean in, come and ask us questions. We are very happy to answer any questions you have around what's happening here that is so special.
Right.
I mean, there are so many communities forming, and from the top of my head, I can tell you that there's a massive data community in Bangalore right now. And I was mentioning this to somebody earlier in the morning that even the next big snowflake killer will be built in India. So there are these massive data communities which meets like once a month, and some very well put together VC events where many founders come in. I think those two would be the immediate opportunities where I would look at. The third would be, which is a very offline method, but you can just keep tracking the repositories which are getting tremendous amounts of check-ins from developers, because those developers are most likely to come in the next 2 to 3 years and start a company.
Okay. So your question is, how can you stay engaged? I would recommend, so I like the choice of word that you use, India heritage, because companies don't have nationalities, right?
Yeah.
And we cut across borders in terms of we almost want to mimic our customers. And that's beautiful in many ways. I think for any of you in the room, if you want to be involved, right? If you want to help any of your portfolio companies anywhere in the world, and if you want them to take advantage or at least want to understand how do they build a global team, including that India team, through SAS Boomi community, we are more than happy to just walk through the unit economics, talent access, and all of that. Just like how every time somebody wants to move to Amsterdam, right, Netherlands does a red carpet program to say introduce you and then teaches you, right? We are happy to do that because ultimately it's about building an ecosystem, right? Just like when we wanted to set up the shop in US, straight away we all come to Salt Lake City because thinking, okay, now that's where you won't go wrong picking Salt Lake City to build their sales GTM mission talent. Like you did that to me,
You're welcome.
right? And now we have built a 45-member team in Leahy, Utah. We are happy to do that, right? And we continuously, at least every 2 to 3 months, I have long sessions that we do about our inbound machinery, like how do we sell the sub 30K deals, sub 50K deals from India, right? And what's the cost of the pod and what's the cost advantage? What allows you to stay in market segments that you do not have to vacate while you still move up market? We are happy to teach. In a way, ultimately, it's going to be an ecosystem win-win if more and more companies set up shop there, and we see that. Like Notion has acquired a Hyderabad-based company because that allows them to do it. ZoomInfo has consistently now been acquiring companies, and they've done this in Kochi, where they acquired a 45-member team, and now it's a 270-member team, and they are building. And one of their CXO is the founder of that company, right? And he is actually operating still out of Kochi in Kerala on a global public company like ZoomInfo, right? These possibilities are endless if we open up our mind to do that. And for us, what's selfishly in it for us? We just want an ecosystem to thrive, right? Just like every time we think about sales in US, it's Salt Lake City and then probably other locations. We just want that to be like, if it is SaaS, we just want India to be there top of the mind, and we are happy to help, right? Ultimately, then it creates a beautiful flywheel for all of us.
So let me make an offer, and since you mentioned,
Yeah.
India SaaS, we said $1 trillion of market cap, India SaaS. So India SaaS is either Indian founder, significant ops in India, or if you visited the Taj Mahal. So all three count. So which means you ask, how can you lean in? If you have a portfolio company, it doesn't have to be Indian at all, but you want to benefit from the playbooks and the programs you see at SAS Boomi, we would very happily have
Absolutely.
any startup in your portfolio on board which wants to discover that journey to product market fit. Thank you. Thank you.
I would, I think that's wonderful. I would add a few things. I think SAS Boomi is an incredible resource of humans who've been doing this. I think spending time in India, meeting funds, early stage funds, meeting these ecosystems, you go to Bangalore, you go to Hyderabad, you'll meet tons of people building these businesses. We have just a few minutes. I want to end with one question for each of you. What excites you the most about India SaaS and India Heritage SaaS? Like when you look at it, the future looks so bright to you because could be a company, could be a trend, whatever it is that just...
I think what excites me most is just ambition. He added
Ambition,
that
yeah.
point to every other ingredient is there: capital, technology, experience, expertise. All of it comes to naught without ambition. And I'm now seeing folks in college, getting out of
Yes.
college, or working very comfortable jobs. You know, last year I hosted a panel, and the founder who came on the panel is a unicorn founder. He said around the time he started his startup journey, his wife, they just had a baby, there were financial things, there's support or something. They moved back into their parents' house, sort of went back to the basement, so to speak, because they wanted to start this company that bad. It's a company called Darwin Box. And so Rohit was here last year and he spoke about it. So it's the ambition that gets me really excited. And there is this fairly rooted in data belief that no outcome is impossible.
Yeah.
There's no global major that you can't take down. There's no technology stack you can't master. And I think there's nothing that can come in the way of that kind of ambition. So that's what excites me.
Right?
I think what has really changed in the last few years and what is more exciting now is, teams are now not looking inward, they're actually looking outside.
Yes.
And I think, that's a conversion because what it is also saying is that founders are going to be a lot more focused on GTM as opposed to just building the product. And that's really exciting. The second part of that is the ability. I think if you look at the last 10, 15 years, I think talent has come a really long way. So if you combine these two factors, that you have the ability to build the best products, but you're also looking outside, which is that you're focused on GTM, I think that's like an ingredient for sure success.
I think it was Girish of Freshworks who once mentioned it in a SAS Boomi event, the dreaming in installments.
Yeah.
Right? We like to dream in installments. I think that's almost true for almost everybody. And I think we all play with the Lego blocks that we are given, right, in terms of skill, training, and what we have. But I think the most important ingredient is the raw ambition and a certain level of shamelessness that we learn, right? Because internally you can be somebody extremely conservative and then self-promotional and all of that. And yet when it comes to actually building a company, ultimately every single one of us have to learn like not to be an introvert trained engineer, but be shameless in actually promoting and speaking about your company, right? It's almost something similar about like nurturing your ambition to want to build companies at global scale and completely not hesitating to do what is important for the stage relevance in terms of at various stages, right? Whether it's moving back to parents' house, like I did that as well in my when I was 30 years old to build a company, like I was actually with my parents to actually say, okay, I want to reduce my expenses and here is what we are going to do. Married, had a kid.
Love
Right?
it.
So we decided to just live as a joint family for the first couple of years. And like whatever it takes, right? Now I'm living in Amsterdam because I want to build a global culture of the company. It's important that the 175 people and the CXOs are all based in US. If all the 4 founders are in India, then we will actually build a different type of company. So it's important that we actually embrace whatever is necessary for the relevance of the company, nurture that ambition and do what it takes to make it happen. I think that realization and more people willing to actually do it and learning from each other to say, okay, what does it take to do it? I think that's really happening. I think that's a very powerful force that cannot be underestimated. And that's why I'm super optimistic about like pretty much every founder that I meet and what becomes possible in the future.
That's fantastic. I'll just sort of maybe end by saying I'm excited because for a number of different reasons. One, the ambition. The ambition of Indian heritage founders and SaaS is just incredible. 2, I am 100% confident that when we come back to this room in 2026, 2027, there will be multiple billionaire ARR companies that were founded in India. And the third element is just the nature of the founders that I'm seeing today are just incredible. They are innovating. They're innovating in deep tech. I think there's someone, I think was mentioned yesterday, Pixel, which is not really SaaS, but 22-year-olds developing nano satellites from India that are up in space now, for example. I just think that ambition is incredible. I would encourage all of you to kind of get to know the ecosystem, get to know SAS Boomi. And so I think we'll see that we're running out of time. We'll end on that note. I'm sure everyone's happy to take questions after we end here, but thank you for spending some time with us to learn a little bit and hear a little bit about India SaaS. Thank you.
Thank you.